Welcome to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this segment, Pat and James ask, what's better than some Richard Kelly Kemick? Well, more Richard Kelly Kemick. In this segment, we pulled together some of his best advice on grants from our last interview. It's all good stuff. It's all valuable stuff. We hope you enjoy.
James, something and I think Pat and I chatted about this a bit before, is that there are also grants for editors, or for grants for writers to pay editors. That I think I have no idea what's going on in the States, both grant-wise or really in any way anymore. But with Canada, I don't want to say common, but they're certainly available. Grants for writers to not keep themselves, but just to pay an editor with. Sometimes I think, Pat, I'm under the same understanding that magazines like Subtrain, Fiddlehead, I can't think of a single one that wouldn't be not just supported by Canada Council, but heavily supported by Canada Council, and then oftentimes a university as well, which of course is supported by the federal government. And then James, to your point a second ago about how different that is, how stark of a difference that is between Canada and the States, and this access to funding. Don't get me wrong, I've benefited. I've been very fortunate in grants to support my life. Sometimes I do think that at some point when an arts community becomes too dependent on grants, such as the literary community in Canada, it's hard not to see, or at least believe, in a decrease in quality because of it. Or rather, maybe not a decrease in quality, but an estrangement between the writer and the reader, because the reader, in kind of many ways, or at least some ways, is immaterial in a way when you're dependent on a grant instead of readers. And I think that might be why, or at least one of the reasons why, that America produces better writers on average, and better magazines as well, I would say. But I don't know. Sometimes I say this to my writer friends and it goes over very poorly. On one hand, I always feel kind of disingenuous when I criticize a granting system that I'm actively beseeching at all times. But I was recently a judge for a competition where I was reading short stories from many magazines, all Canadian. And it, not in all of them, by no means, not in all of them. I would say in the majority of them, if not vast majority of them, there is what I would qualify as a hostility to the reader. That the idea that, and I think that hostility oftentimes comes up in making the reader do all the intellectual heavy lifting, of not just assembling theme, but just like assembling plot or narrative or what is happening. And I feel like that hostility, in many ways, is a product of the granting system. That there's no, I don't want to say accountability, but from the writer to the reader, but there's perhaps a lack of relationship. And when we think about great writing, whatever like our favorite author, favorite book is, I would argue that it's always because the relationship between yourself and the writer, the written material, is so strong that that's what makes it your favorite book. For whatever reason that relationship develops, that's what makes it so good. And when there's this hostility, or at the very least just ignoring of the reader, I do think it's a detriment to the final product. My own argument starts to fall apart, however, because Canada is so steeped in Canadian literature is so steeped in granting culture that it's impossible to get away from. Even if you don't apply to Canada Council yourself, if you're ever published, you will still benefit from Canada Council, because whomever is publishing you has that. I don't really have I'm in a kind of a closed system here where I'm saying that alternatives may be better, but I don't really have any firsthand
Yeah.
knowledge of those
Yeah.
alternatives.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. It's very easy to criticize the fishbowl you're in,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
What would be the 5 things you would tell us that we need to keep in mind?
I'm trying to brainstorm 5. I have 2. I
Okay,
can
2's enough. 2's enough. We'll work with 2.
Counter offer, 2 things.
um, the first thing, when I was at University of New Brunswick, I had a poetry professor who taught me many things, many things.
Mhm.
Arguably, the thing that he taught me that has stuck with me the most, which is, or that I've benefited from the most, I should say, um, is that he was adamant that we should just apply to stuff.
Mm,
He was adamant in this with both grants and submitting our work to journals and magazines and competitions and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
Competitions might be there might be a caveat with that one that they often cost money. So he might kind of give a you might be partially enthused about that one. But for just submissions to magazines and especially grants, to just apply, that he said a lot of students think like, oh, well, I'm not a real writer or I'm not good enough to, so I won't do that yet. And then they carry that, and then that mentality kind of sticks with them even after they graduate. And then it's just kind of the rest of their life. And I took what he said to heart, and it's really helped me. I used to be on the editorial board for the Fiddlehead,
Mm.
and I've also had the fortune of serving as like a judge or a jury for competitions or a jury member for grants. And it is such all of those were such valuable experiences because it showed me that even in my grant applications or submissions that were rejected, which is
Mhm.
the majority of them, it showed me not to get as bummed out as I used to get about those
Mm.
rejections. Like Pat, you mentioned a second ago that you had a manuscript that is, correct me if I'm wrong, that you said kind of made it up the rejection ladder of
yeah,
Penguin.
yeah.
Yeah, just in my experience of being on the other side of the desk, that when something makes it up the rejection ladder, that's such a tremendous accomplishment
Yeah.
Yeah.
that at some point, at some rung in the ladder, it really just is. They just have to choose someone, and by extension, not choose the other 5 that were in the running or whatever. And there, um, so I would urge all writers and even artists, even though I know nothing about other art forms,
Mhm.
um, to apply to grants. That
Mm,
if you're eligible, like if you meet the requirements, and I think again, just in Canada, a lot of grants have reduced their application requirements or like
Mhm.
publishing requirements or
right.
resume requirements. If you meet the requirements, yes, just apply. And then even if you get rejected, know that if you have an idea, you still made it along quite deep into the process.
Good one.
Um,
Yeah.
which would perhaps bring me to my second point is to have an idea that you're applying with. I found, again, this is just in my experience of being a jury member, the vast, vast, vast majority of grant applicants don't have an idea, but they're applying they're applying with an emotion. And which is tough to buy into on a jury perspective. So that if you have an idea and you're specific in that idea, that the higher degree of specificity that you're able to have, I feel like the higher of a likelihood you'll
Right.
be successful. If you have an idea and you're specific with it, that even if you're rejected, I would still wager a lot of money that you made it quite far into the process. And then just at the end, it didn't work out for
Yeah.
reasons beyond your control. But those were my those would be my biggest two for sure. Just to apply and apply with an idea and know that you took a crack at it. And then maybe if you're rejected, don't. I feel like I beat myself up a lot with rejections, as I know many writers do. But just to try and that's a weakness of mine that I let rejections get to me. That if you're able to move on from it and apply again, the better things will go.
Mhm.
That research grant I emailed you about
Mm,
initially, it gave me a whole new framework for this novel I'm starting, and I was like,
mm.
"Holy shit, it's gonna be a lot better now."
Yeah, yeah, Pat, that's a fantastic point, and I remember thinking the same thing in applying for grants in the past as well. That yeah, you can take it as absolutely as part of the process in and of itself. Like for example, those applications that I mentioned a second ago about that they're applying with an emotion, not a
Yeah. Mm.
I not, not a specific project. I would also say that's true when I've worked with magazines and going through slush piles of submissions. That
Mm.
most short stories or poems aren't really about anything at all, but the writer kind of has this thought and they're just kind of letting it roll onto the page and then fucking shoving it onto someone else. Um, yeah, but the grant process, in many ways, if you're taking an earnest crack at it, forces you to articulate your ideas. That I think helps concretize the project. Exactly as you said.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And
Yeah.
so as you've gone along, you've applied for more grants. Do you kind of have a library of materials?
Kind of, yeah. I certainly see where you're coming from, James. Kind of that. There's because not always. Or okay, okay, with Canada Council, for example, each time I apply, not always, but each time it's kind of with a different project. And then the only times that I repeat applications with the same project is when that grant was originally declined.
Mm.
Mm.
Um, and then, but it's certainly a similar skeleton, like
Mhm.
yeah, regardless of projects. However, j- just because a grant is successful doesn't necessarily mean that that template that I used or like that method of articulation doesn't necessarily mean that that was the best one or better than ones that have been declined. That the
Mm.
it is a lot. It is really subjective on the jury. For example, I think I can say this. That I am judging for a competition right now, and the story that I think by far was the best one, like not even close of a competition. That story, it hasn't been announced yet, and I'm not entirely, but it's not going to win.
Oh.
Yeah, the other judges weren't enthused, and so it would it would be a great error. Oh, a shattering error. I think if that writer were then to take this rejection of this
Yeah.
story as like, oh, I should change my story. Oh, my heart breaks at the thought.
Yeah.
Um, so just because a grant is declined, I definitely take it as feedback, as like keeping an
Mhm.
open mind of things that I can change but I try not to let it be a reverberating judgment to the grant application and to the project itself. Just because a grant
Mhm.
declined doesn't. I try not to let me think like I should just turf this project
Right.
as a
Yeah.
whole.
Yeah.
That being said, if I may, maybe I have one other thing to add to my list of five that I'm slowly building towards.
You're
Every
aggravating.
grant that I uh, write includes a sentence that was told to me by a professor, and I think it's a good sentence that I encourage everyone to include in their own. It's a sentence that starts, "There's an urgency to this project because," and then you just fill in whatever bullshit you want after.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and so every grant application I have includes this sentence, including the grants that have been declined, certainly. But I feel like it's a good sentence to include because you're not only arguing of why you deserve the grant, but why you must have the grant right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of elbows your other
Yeah.
competition out of the
Yeah.
way. There are times when I feel a lot of guilt about being a writer,
Mm.
in that just such a great fucking life. It's the best. Sometimes I'm walking the dog and I walk past people and think like they don't even know how much better my life is than theirs, and they're just going about their shitty little day. Um, and I I remember when I got my first grant, which was it was an Alberta Foundation grant, um, and it was so wonderful. Not just because of the money was great, but it's so affirming in a
Yeah.
way that's really. And I still feel that affirmation anytime I get a grant. Like I'm very thankful for the money, but then it's a real boost to the ego. I
Yeah.
feel as well. The first time I got a grant, my brother, who's just a year older than me, was working in a mine in northern BC.
Oh, wow.
And I was so enthused about the grant and so proud of the grant. Absolutely. I also felt a lot of guilt that I knew like part of his paycheck was being skimmed off to go into my shitty little poetry grant. Um, and that kind of stuck with me. So I often feel a lot of guilt about being a writer because of grants. And I feel like that guilt, yeah, when I say this out loud, it just seems wildly unhealthy, but I feel like that guilt kind of compels me to write. That I
Yeah.
think like if I've stolen this money from someone, the least I can do is fucking write a few lines. And I remember when kind of, I don't want to say made the decision to be a writer, but maybe that's it. Um, yeah, and that how much it changed how I interact with the world,
Mm.
um, irrevocably in many ways, and I feel really fortunate for that, very fortunate for it. Uh, yeah, that it does. I don't know. It's kind of intoxicating in a way. I don't know. There just seems to be like all these like piles of cash just around in the world, and you just have to go up and and just grab as much as you can. Yeah, and it's just inexhaustible.
First, thanks to Richard Kelly Kemick for his time. It's such a wonderful interview. We really enjoyed having him on the show, and hope to have him back again when he's putting out his next book or has something new to announce or just feels like having a chat. We really, really enjoyed our time with him. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so please leave a comment, join our chat page, or send us an email at giftedunderachievers@substack.com. We're available on Spotify, iTunes, and anywhere else you like to get your podcasts. Thank you, and have an awesome, awesome day.